Hi everyone, great to see so many people here. We're super happy about Innovation Week. Very excited about this year's data feast. Avo has now turned this into an annual data feast that we host on Innovation Week, which we are really excited about. We have a really exciting lineup today. Very excited about it. I'll tell you a little bit about it. We have Silla Jóhannsdóttir, CTO of HEIMA. Hello, my girl. She's going to talk about the post-launch dilemma. So they have added a bunch of analytics events into the app. What do they do next? That's a great question. Then we have Gunnar Hólmsteinn. Yes, hello, the CEO and co-founder of QuestPortal. Woohoo! He's going to talk about his top data mistakes ordered by cost, which I am very excited to hear more about. I know about one of them. And I know how much it costs, too. Very exciting. Then we have Kyle Smith. Where are you, Kyle? Hi, Kyle. He is head of data at Smitten, which is, they're not part of the block party. No, never mind. He is doing When Ship Hits the Fan, which I really love the punny title there. Kudos, Kyle.
Got one thing right.
And then finally, we have someone all the way from Finland, Jacopo. He is the original data engineer at Wolt. Wolt just launched in Iceland, and so we thought it was a perfect opportunity to fly Jacopo out here to Iceland. Thank you, Jacopo, for being with us today. So Wolt today is 8,000 people approximately, and he was employee number 20. So we're talking about experience here. So he's going to talk about fueling growth through data. And I think with that, I will just hand it over to Silla.
Yes. So, hello everyone. My name is Silla Jóhannsdóttir, and I'm the CTO and co-founder of HEIMA. Hey, my other co-founder. So, HEIMA is a software solution that helps families organize their household work and mental load in a simple, fun, and fair way. And now it's been almost 2 months since we launched our minimum lovable product, and it's been quite a journey. We have 9,300 total users after these 2 months, so we're pretty pleased with that. And we've gotten our inboxes have flooded with feedback, and we've got a lot of good feedback, organic growth, no money spent on advertisement. So we're quite happy, but it's not all fun and games, you know. There are some dramas. And now I'm gonna talk about, I forgot this. Do I use this? No. Okay, I'll just be here, no problem. So I'm going to talk about a certain dilemma that we've been facing, a data dilemma. So our problem is twofold. We didn't quite understand the data, and also there was some discrepancy in the data. So I'm not a data engineer. Alma isn't either, and we're a small team. So in the beginning of the year, we were like, okay, we're not going to launch without tracking. That's one of the biggest mistakes that software companies make, and we're not going to. Let's do this data thing. Let's check that box. So naturally, we set up some events with Avo, which is, by the way, super simple and easy to do. I really recommend. And our analytic platform of choice, which is Amplitude. And we're like, okay, what do users do in the app? Users complete tasks, they create tasks such as taking out the garbage. And that's something that makes sense to track. Also, we should track, authentication, whatever. So we do that. We define some events. And we don't really think about the whole picture, We do the how, but we don't think about the what and the why. And since I'm a 90s kid that loves Harry Potter, I'm going to describe this in a Harry Potter manner. Any Harry Potter fans in the room? Yes. Of course. it's like reading Harry Potter, and you're like, okay, Harry Potter is a wizard. Voldemort is a, evil wizard. And not, getting to know what happens next. What's the dilemma? Who will the good or the evil win? So we had defined the events, but we hadn't, gotten the answers. So, we didn't understand the data, that's one. But the other thing was the discrepancy. So Alma always makes fun of me. I'm the I'm the person that wants to have everything under control. Think a lot about security. I'm super tense about it. I don't want us to track something that we're not allowed to track. We need to follow all the GDPR rules and everything. And so, we have some numbers of installs in App Store and Play Store, and that number didn't add up to the number in Amplitude. And we're like, yeah, that's probably because we're opting users out if they don't allow us to track. That probably makes sense. So we talked to our friends at, where are you? We said Smitten and Hólmsteinn, and we asked them about this. Like, yeah, are you also seeing, only part of the users are in Amplitude? And, go back to this screen. You probably have seen this screen in many apps before. It's, is it okay if we track your activity? But what we hadn't realized is that this is only asking about third-party, external activity, not internal activity. So David and Oddur in Hólmsteinn and some other people were like, no, you don't need to do this. This is only Instagram and Facebook and some ads. So we had been filtering out every user that said, ask app not to track. So that was a conceptual misunderstanding we had. So, yay. Now we have our answer. Now we knew why this discrepancy was happening.
You say it was 50%, was it?
I actually didn't mention percentage. Actually, it was only 30% or something. Which I was pretty... That opted out, yeah. So I was like, okay, that's actually pretty good. Our users are actually okay with us tracking, third-party activity. But yeah, this was a huge facepalm moment for me. But you live and you learn. That's fine. And now everything is perfect. Thank you. No, I'm joking. So when we had fixed this discrepancy, we needed to go back to the drawing table and, see the whole picture. What is success? We haven't even, we're still in that discussion. What do we want to use our analytical platforms for? So we are in the process of defining questions that are going to help us. Questions like, who is the super user of the family? And what is the difference between how children and adults behave in our app? And now we are kind of starting to understand why we need these events, how we need to, create our dashboards accordingly, and also what are we going to use these dashboards for? A couple of weeks ago, our dashboards were like a bunch of drafts, just like everything, like activity. It was just a mess. And we're getting better each day. I've been doing some data sprint, and there's not a yellow weather warning in data land, but there's not green fields and blue skies yet. And maybe it never, probably never will be. This is not like you'll never reach the finish line in this. You always have to evolve your as you will evolve your product, you will need to adjust your analytics and define new events and such. So, but this has been a really interesting journey for us. And like I say, it's only 2 months since we launched. So there's still a lot to learn, but at least we know why we don't, have all of our users visible in our analytical tools and so forth. So that's it for me. Thank you so much. And And you can download our app here through this QR code. And if you have any questions, you can ask them now or later.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Does anyone have any questions right now? Ready with questions?
No questions. It was perfect.
Thank you so much, Silla. This was lovely and took me down some memory lanes, definitely. Very triggering talk, really. It's quite a triggering talk, you know. So up next is just directly Gunnar Hólmsteinn, I think. So we're going to switch over to that. Thank you, Gunnar. Take it away. Woo! Oh, snap.
Pleasure to be here. So I'm going to talk about a couple of different mistakes from my 4 previous startups. So Klara, QuestUp, Titan, and QuestPortal. So Klara was in 2008, QuestUp 2012-ish. So I'm probably the old guy now. I used to be the young kid in those talks. Yes, I'm gonna make it very brief. There's no story between them. There's just 5 mistakes, and I'm trying to order them roughly by cost. So starting off, our first business plan we made, we locked ourselves in a cabin. We wrote this perfect business plan that had this massive hockey stick growth. It was beautiful, and we showed this so proudly to investors until an investor pointed out that when we were calculating our revenue, we had 12 months in the year, and all of our costs had 1 month in a year. So it was the costs there just extremely embarrassing, and that investor did not put any money in us. So just a face plant, nothing. Okay, so this one is directly related to maybe what HEIMA is dealing with right now. So the amount of time I've spent hunting for discrepancy in data, seeing a different number in App Store and Play Store, another one in Amplitude, whatever, Google, Apple, all the stuff that Apple is doing right now, it's been extremely frustrating. And throughout my career, it doesn't matter if it's just me trying to hunt something down or asking a whole team of data scientists to hunt something down and yelling at Thora for having the wrong number somewhere. The biggest mistake there is just trying to be a perfectionist there. And I would recommend to everyone, just say, fuck it, you will have as many different numbers as you have different dashboards, and just accept it and know that every single one of those is probably going to be incorrect in the same way over time, and directionally they will tell you something maybe. Yeah. So cost, just peace of mind. Similar story, I'm assuming that a lot of people here have done some retention analysis. The amount of time I've spent arguing about what type of retention we're exactly talking about. Are we doing a rolling retention, a window retention? Are we doing UTC timeline retention? Can I get a show of hands of how many have debated different types of retention? UTC here.
UTC,
yes.
But if you have someone playing in San Francisco and they play over 5 p.m., they hit 2 days. What are you going to do then? Is that 2 days of retention? Yeah. Okay. Again, just fuck it, use the default. Don't argue about it. If you just use whatever mixed panel amplitude has default, it will be the same across all your slices. Just use that and don't argue about it. It'll save you a lot of just energy and just confidence. It doesn't matter. It's maybe a hot take, but I don't think it actually matters. Okay, another one is a bit costlier. At QuestUp, we had a lot of issues with moderation. And at the next startup we did, we over-indexed on that. So we spent an incredible amount of time on creating this algorithm that detected a face when 2 players were playing over a video. If we didn't see a face, we would blur the photo, assuming ill intent. Yes. So we spent a lot of Joey spent weeks on this. So his salary was very focused on blurring camera feeds if we did not detect a face. Immediately after launching this app, we saw that people that show their penises on in camera feeds do not care and just figure out a way to have their face just also in the same picture and bypass the blurring algorithm. The cost is roughly $4K. We could also say that the cost there is $8 million because that company did not work. So it might be at the end.
And the next one, like at that same company, Tea Time, when we were doing like launching our first game, we wanted to have like a dashboard. So we had like all the events kind of funnel into BigQuery. We set up Data Studio, and as kind of like our test flight users and kind of beta testers were using the app, we wanted the dashboard to be real time, and we put it up as real time as we could. We had a very demanding CEO that you all remember, who wanted like even more real time. So I went all over the place in like BigQuery and Data Studio and like turned on and off all sorts of like toggles, and the dashboard became like incredibly real time. And then when we launched, we went from having like 20 users to like with a big marketing push, we had like 40,000 or 70,000 users in the first couple of days. And to make this dashboard real time, we didn't realize at the time, but like we had these like 4 dashboards on our wall, and one of the things I did was like I put up like a Chrome extension called Revolver that would refresh the browser, like a hard refresh every 10 minutes. And one of the things I did in Data Studio was like turning off cache. So having 20 users and going to 70,000 users meant the BigQuery queries went from like 200 megabytes to 6,000 yottabytes. And like Google had no problem charging us $85,000 for the first 2 days. And like their servers didn't even like sweat. So like if you see like a warning like this about cache, like cache, what is cache? Nobody knows. Like it's boring, it's like old thing. And so just read the, like click the like learn more to save yourself the problem. Like I think this has probably like lowered the temperature of Earth by like 0.1 degrees, like the server's humming. Yeah, so I think this tops the list. But yeah, thank you.
Takk Gunni, það var svo gott. This was great, Gunni. Also a very triggering talk.
Yes.
I think we have had multiple debates around many of the things that.
Why is this dashboard like 2,000 users and this one is 2,500?
Yeah, exactly. Server, just the server count is one more count that you have also always around. The next up, while Thora is setting it up, we have Kyle. Would you mind joining us here on stage? We're super excited to hear what you have to say. When shit hits the fan. Enjoy, everyone.
All right. I was told this is supposed to be a 30-minute talk, so sorry in advance. Yeah, so this is when shit hits the fan. A perfect storm of unfortunate events that led to a disaster with our primary KPI. I'm Kyle, as mentioned earlier. And for those of you that don't know, Smitten is a dating app, and our objective or mission is to make the most fun dating app in the world. And we do that by using a combination of fun profile elements and games such as these that make it easier for people to talk to each other and get the conversation started and break the ice. So I was invited here today to talk about a tragedy about our North Star metric. One of our core North Star metrics is or the core, I should say, is weekly active users. As a consumer app, we churn a lot on the front end on acquiring users, and as a dating app, we churn a lot on the back end because the better we are at our job, the faster we lose users. So North Star metric, so weekly active users is a good indicator of the health of each market. So, chapter 1, the calm before the storm. Something very bad happens to our North Star metric. There are going to be some graphs in here, sorry. But our story starts in holiday season of 2022. It's the end of the year. We're doing 4 major passes on analytics events, and we're ramping up towards our busiest day of the year, which historically is the first Sunday after the New Year. So as you can see, as we're getting towards the end of the year, we're ramping up towards Swiping Sunday, January 8th. So in addition to a huge marketing push leading up to that, we also are hosting an event on the day, and we're all excited. The New Year comes, and we see a massive spike in weekly active users. So we're awesome, right? Just doing such a good job. So once we see this huge spike, we are maintaining weekly active user levels. We decided, hey, let's cut spending a little bit. Let's like level out and just enjoy the weekly active users, focus on product optimization, product-led growth, those types of things. And we just see like a steady, nothing too significant here or there. First, in order to give us a little bit more of a jump start, right around March, we decided to launch in Norway. And launching into a new market, of course, a big uptick of users. So everything's going well. We are just working on optimizing our spending patterns. We're spending much less advertising money than we were leading up to the new year. And then the first week of April, as some people in the audience might remember, there is the slope. We, coming to the office the first week of April, look at the numbers from the previous week, and it's a disaster. Our weekly active user count dropped by 11% within 1 week with no changes to the underlying factors of the metric. We didn't change spending, we didn't change the product, there were no outages, nothing. It just, all of a sudden we had a massive drop. So, obviously, everything was not fine. Everything was on fire, and that leads us into chapter 2. So we're in this situation where we have no clue what's going on. No department knows what's going on. There was no indicator to this. The growth or the weekly active user indicator was just like pretty much stable up until this point. And so my team, the data team, started like panicking, like, oh my God, what is happening here? We had no clue. All of our typical indicators like had no sign or anything. So we decided to do a deep dive. Which consists of mainly me. First off, I started with defining the metric itself. So weekly active users is defined with a couple of set of properties that we have that I'll go into in a second. And by identifying those definitions, or by pointing those out, diving into each one and seeing if there were any changes to any of those underlying elements or properties. So our weekly active user metric has 3 primary definitions. A user has to have a user ID. They have to not be anonymous, and they can't be banned. They have to have enough information in their profile to actually show up to other users, of course. And they have to perform an action that we've marked as active in Amplitude, which just means like it's triggered by a user behavior. User does an action, and that triggers the event directly. So started diving in. There was no apparent reason why the user ID would cause an issue. We had made a change recently to the way we classified user profiles. So we thought that could possibly be an issue. And we didn't see any changes in the events that were marked as active in Amplitude. So did some more research into the way we classified user profiles with the tech team, and we spent like half a day on this. We were just banging our heads against the wall. Came to the conclusion that that was not the problem at all. So not knowing what to do, I was like, oh crap, well, let's do the long and arduous task of breaking down each action in Amplitude marked as active, event by event, property by property, and seeing if any changes have been made. And yes, so someone made a terrible decision and made this change to the server sent message chat event. It's an awesome name, I know. But it was a horrible decision. I can't believe someone actually did that. Yeah, so that leads us into chapter 3. So now I've identified, okay, this is why the number dropped. What does it actually mean? What actually happened? Well, what feels like 15 minutes ago, I showed this slide about the beginning of the story, and the problem actually originated on this analytics pass. December 29th, we pushed a change to server sent message chat, which is an active event in Amplitude. And we made a change to one of the properties, or we implemented it in and eventually made a change to one of the properties. But this event is marked as active because it requires a user to be in a match. And when they're in a match, they play a game or a profile element on their match's profile. And when they do that, the server automatically posts a message with the results on their behalf in the chat. And the event fires. And this is marked an active event because it requires the user to actually play the game for the event to fire. Well, neither myself nor the developer that implemented this event back in December 29th knew that there was a case with a property type of info that fired every single time a match occurred. And that is where the problem lies. That is a big problem because match happen, the event when a match does occur, is an inactive event. And the reason for this is because it requires actions that are asynchronous from two different users. So for example, if John likes Jane on a Friday, and then John just falls off to the face of the earth and quits using the app, Jane might not like them back until Monday in the following week. And on Monday, when she likes John back, match happen event fires for both users. One of them is active and one of them is inactive. And the error occurred because server sent message chat unexpectedly fired at the same exact time that this fired, making both of these users look active, which was a disaster. It was awful. So normally, if you had no clue what you were looking at and you saw a spike like this within 1 week without any underlying factors, like you didn't increase marketing spend by 50% or something, this would cause huge red flags all over the place. You'd pretty much spot it immediately. However, this was exactly when we were winding up for our biggest day of the year. So we were already expecting a massive spike. We saw one as we expected, and we're like, this is awesome, we're the best. And this is how it ended up looking before and after the fact. So you can see that we expected a spike, or a pretty good increase in weekly active users, but we reported on a much higher one, and we just had no clue. So we only actually found out that this was an issue because of some silly mistake of me trying to save some events on Amplitude, because this was redundant with match happened in some instances. So it was a definite misfortune, definite drama, yeah. So the moral of this story, I guess, is what to do in these situations. So here are a few things that I've learned from this situation and that we try to implement going forward. First off, explicitly define your KPIs, meaning don't use a flag in Amplitude that's either active or inactive to define things like weekly active users. You want to explicitly define the events and the properties that consist of that KPI, because otherwise you could have an instance where something unexpectedly fires with a random property and it just blows everything up. The second thing is assume, when you're working with important or high value KPIs, assume that you're wrong until you prove yourself otherwise. So in this case, if I would have built a supplementary graph with the match happened event, I would have seen that our measured KPI exactly matched happen, which shouldn't have been the case. Postmortems are critical because it allowed me to dive into each individual event that happened in this timeline and figure out what the heck happened and why and how, and how unfortunate that was that it happened at that exact time to not be able to detect it. And the last piece is communication. To communicate with your team, both in the findings of the postmortem, but also in helping reinforce the confidence, because obviously after that massive slope, people freaked out and we don't want to look at the data anymore. We don't care about the data. We don't want to use it because how can we trust it? And so being open or having open lines of communication, both with your findings and with your plans for improvement, are critical in rebuilding and reinforcing the trust in your data. And that's me. Thank you for me.
I'm so sorry.
I know, it's awful. PTSD.
Jacopo is mic'd up, okay? So he's switching his computers. Okay, nice. While they do that, I remember a bunch of similar stories like this. So Kyle, thank you for sharing your traumatic story. It's terrible, but we can all relate, or many of us at least can relate.
All right, let's try this out.
Let's try this. So take it away.
Okay.
Jacopo!
Maybe. All right.
Yes, Jacopo, take it away.
We got it. Okay, we can't use that, so let's do slideshow. All right. This is one of the first times I talk in front of a crowd in 3 years, so just setting the expectations very low, like everything does. So today I'm going to talk a bit about what are my reflections on working on data during Wolt's growth journey. And we are going to look at the business perspective and also the product analytics perspective. They are sort of connected. And well, let's start from here. My journey at Wolt started in 2016 by replying to a Facebook message And well, I started a few months after this. I was very early in the company, around employee number 20, something like that. Now we are 8,000 people and delivering food and other things in 24 countries. So quite a big journey from 20 people. And it has been a great data journey, very interesting data journey, a lot of learnings along the way, a lot of dilemmas. So today we are going to sort of unfold a few. This is how the company looked like when I joined. So pretty much an empty office. There were no desks. We built you know how these things go. You come in and they tell you, oh, it's going to be a great journey. And then you have to unbox the IKEA tables. So it was a change for me at least. But yeah, all in all, the first few years at Wolt have been super intense, a lot of learnings, dilemmas, learnings, and a lot of drama. And the first thing we did there was that you know, we were sort of in front of this big decision, what do we sort of do data-wise, but we agreed that, okay, we will focus 100% only on opening a window over our business. And that was probably the best decision we did, because we started to look at how can we build a common and centralized way to look at the business across all roles and markets. That was the first big decision we made. And that sort of came through how our CEO used to look at the data. And this is a copy of our first data warehouse that we had, just an Excel sheet. Don't do anything fancy. If you have a button to download data and put it in Excel, and you can get up to speed like that, do it. It's just that's, you know, if it can get you where you need to be in terms of transparency, technology comes only to solve problems of scaling. So this is how we look at things in 2015, 2016, and it was really great because our CEO could directly sort of interface with the data and build a way to look at how the company operated. And unfortunately, I had to blur all the numbers here. However, you pretty much you get an idea. This is a dashboard. You can look at weekly, monthly, cities, have a playground where you can experiment different things, look at delivery metrics, and sort of starts to build a window at how your business is running. Super useful. And then one of my first tasks when I joined was to try to figure out how do we do this sort of not in this way, so that not only one person can look at it, but you know, more than one person can look at it, and sort of other people can learn. And that was an interesting journey, and we did a lot of mistakes along the way. But you know, sometimes you need to make mistakes to learn stuff, and nowadays we call them learnings, not mistakes. And that sort of led to very interesting decisions and good data products internally. The thing that, although we didn't get right, was the BI tool. So we went through a few iterations of this, and in 2018, after a couple of years of letting everybody write their SQLs into a dashboard, we came to the realization that that's not a great idea, because everybody looked at, we were in meetings and people were like talking about, we are a delivery business, so we look at rejections, delivery times, and everybody had their own cut of that number. And sort of, we said, okay, let's stop. Let's find a way for everybody to look at the same things in the same way. And we sort of started to migrate to this more structured BI tool. We elected Looker. We did a huge, painful migration, 6 months of pain. But then we ended up with a tool that really works. And we have been basically running the same stuff since 2018. We have integrated it really well with our internal tools. And we can look at all our KPIs straight from our data warehouse, and our CEO uses this. The entire company uses this, or cuts of this, or whatever is behind the scenes. Our metrics cubes there. So this was sort of a great success for us, and as we were scaling the business, we were sort of able to look at it consistently and apply learnings from different markets, different cities. To other city launches and so on. But of course, the problem is that if we would have known this in 2010, probably we would have gone faster somewhere. In reality, knowing what you need to build at a given time is impossible, almost impossible, and it's still impossible today, even if we sort of have practiced this a bit. But of course, you can always have sort of brainstorming sessions, and we have plenty of them. This is from 2016. We had plenty of things. We are just starting to build right now, like loyalty and other things already there. We figured everything out. But building everything else before loyalty took a few iterations, so it's hard work. But luckily, someone with great intuition sort of helped us chart a path forward, both on the business side as well as on the product side. Is our CEO, Mickey. And we came up with a product that sort of worked, and people really loved. And that sort of was built basically mostly on intuition. We didn't have any metrics on the product side. We only had metrics on the business. With that, what we prioritized back then. It was actually a big question, big dilemma. Should we prioritize business? Should we prioritize product? Should we try to do both? But luckily, we chose to do one thing really well, and that was the business side. But obviously, it's all fun and games when your application is a one-page app that looks like this. But then you can win some awards with it and feel good. 2016 here, all young and fresh. But when things start to become more complicated, then you sort of ask yourself, what should we optimize? And nowadays, one thing that I realize is that we start to ask ourselves what we want to optimize data-wise too late. And in the next 10 minutes or 15 minutes, I'll show you what we are trying to do to fix this and what we want to optimize for right now when it comes to product analytics. Our application went through a few iterations and changes from a very simple sort of one-page app like here on the left. We started to add some views. We started to add features like reviews and so on. And at that point, the mechanics of the application changed a lot, right? You sort of start to have users that prefer to use the app in a certain way. You start to have maybe some personas like explorers or people that always order the same stuff. But I can tell you that our application, if you were in the city center of Helsinki, looked the same for every single user until like, I don't know, a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. So we didn't use any data basically to do pretty much anything and not even understand deeply, right? What I mean by understand deeply is you sort of look at your data as part of the development process and use to guide decisions. So we didn't do that much until very recently. And then we also had some random things like we explored with experimentation, but we weren't really ready for it. So it's kind of fun sidetrack. 2017 we did that. That was a mistake. Lesson learned. But and not having a sort of tracking in place and not having very good tracking led us also to doing really interesting and strange things like trying to launch a social network in the app and then pull it after 1 week because we couldn't have moderators to moderate what people wrote in there. It's interesting how people behave sometimes. You think like you do something very good for discovery, but for discovering food and helping people to, write reviews, but in reality you have, other things written there. So, but that was an expensive mistake because we built a feature, we launched it, and sort of we weren't able to understand if people were sort of finding it useful, and then we ended up scrapping it completely. And this basically was seen only by a few users, but it took several months of design work, development work in a team that's very small. That's very expensive mistake or learning. But as said, our product has been basically built on intuition for a long time, just because we weren't able to make sense of the data and make data part of the sort of building process of the product. And we just ended up opting for building the product we would love to use every day. And that worked up until now. But behind the scene, we started to build a sort of a product team so that every sort of team has a clear understanding, a mission, and clear responsibilities. And our application is, especially the consumer application, is built by a large amount of teams right now. And so we try to also build sort of practices for people to try to make decisions when to build deep, when to build incrementally, when to adapt to changes, or when to anticipate changes, and a mix of all the above. And we got so far. We got to where we are today. And as I mentioned, the big thing for us in progress is how to learn from the users using our product. And that's something that has been truly hard because it hasn't been embedded in the culture of the product development, and we haven't sort of needed it so far. And in addition to that, getting the data right in a database where you store purchases is one thing, but getting data right in a product that's developed by a large amount of people in different teams with different understanding of what it means, for example, to do tracking right, is non-trivial and is actually extremely challenging, especially if not everybody is aligned on where that data is going to be utilized. And it's really hard stuff. We actually cried every now and then about it, and many meetings looked like that. So we also went through all the stages of grief of working with data, workarounds, trying stuff until it works, and or it doesn't. And sort of the situation right now is quite complex, and we need to solve it. Just to give you a bit of context, how our product development works right now on the consumer side, we have approximately 100 people across 10 plus teams between designers, engineers, analysts, data scientists, product leads working on consumer and Wolt.com. They are our consumer apps, Android, iOS, and Wolt.com. So it's a lot of people, a lot of teams. Everyone has different incentives and agendas. So we sort of started to look at how can we replicate what we have done on the business side, but apply it on the product analytics side. So we sort of have three incentives, or sort of three angles how we look at this. But the first thing we did was that we started to design a very simple way to track our apps, or the consumer app, or any other app we built in the same way. So we sort of instrumented technically a tracking paradigm that is super simple. Every sort of piece of content that the user can see, every page is a view for us, and a view can be described in different ways using a log type. Is it everything that happens in a view can be described in three ways. Is it sort of a background data? Does it have a background data refresh? Does it carry impressions, stuff that people see? Does it carry interactions, stuff that people click on or tap on, and so on? And that kind of is how we basically track anything. It's our coordinate system for events. And you can name anything, a cart interaction, add item, and it's super easy for someone to picture, okay, it happens in a shopping cart, is an interaction, and it's probably add item is sort of self-explanatory. Or if you look at the loyalty wallet view, well, it's a view of the loyalty wallet, and so on. So that was the big thing that we did first to sort of align this. But then immediately we made a mistake. So instead of building a proper tool to sort of store all this information properly, we threw all this stuff into a YAML repository that both engineers and analysts hated to work with. And this is what we are fixing right now. So if you squint your eyes very closely, you can see deprecated use AVO in the name of the YAML file here. So yeah, that's how we are trying to fix the problem right now. Thank you for that. And maybe I didn't mention it. What are we planning to use all this for, and how we are structuring our event pipelines? It's actually quite a fascinating story. We don't do any reporting unless we have the data in Snowflake. So everything, before it goes to any other third-party tool, goes first to first-party storage. And sort of the way we have looked at this in the past, and the role this repository played was sort of to start the whole thing. We have sort of an event bank where we store events. They are instrumented in the app by someone. They flow into Snowflake, and then from Snowflake they are exposed with a sort of interesting, simple interface in our BI tool. And they also go to Mixpanel. So basically, there is a common thread. People can follow a canonical event from the implementation, from the specification to the implementation, all the way to Mixpanel, and sort of, if you...
Do you not have the Mixpanel SDK in the app?
No, it's a choice, because we do a lot of enriching, so we don't send backend events at all, but we have our transactional events that are mixed up in Snowflake when we extract the data and we send it to Mixpanel. That gives us one-to-one data sets, so our analysts can look at with SQL at an A/B test in Snowflake, and they can make the same lookup in Mixpanel. The data is exactly identical, and that builds trust on the data, which usually means you have the same problem in both places. You don't have, at least it's the same problem. You don't have 2 or 3 different problems in 2 or 3 different places. So right now, basically, if someone sees something suspicious in Mixpanel, probably is because we implemented something suspicious in the app. So you sort of can go directly there and try to figure it out. And then it's very seldom happens that there is something wrong in Snowflake, because we don't usually we tend not to touch that part. We don't do real time here. We don't do real time by choice, because real time is not a need. Real time is a need for when you actually have a use case. For example, if we would use our events to do some at inference for machine learning, then we might have a real-time use case. But for someone to look at the dashboard and say, how many people are in the shopping cart right now?
You just deploy a test.
Huh?
You deploy a test?
Well, we can look at the data in Snowflake in our staging layer in real time, but we cannot look at them in Mixpanel. In Mixpanel, we only do deferred loads one day. And at our scale, it takes about 4 to 6 hours to load data in Mixpanel. So it's a design choice, especially because we want to enrich with transactional events. For example, one of our problems, we are going really deep, really fast here, but one of our challenges is that when someone makes an order, our definition of one of our main business metrics is our order count, right? But our order count is not an order when the customer sends it, because between you submitting an order request on your app and the food being delivered, at least 30 minutes pass usually, and anything can happen. And one of the outcomes is that maybe your food doesn't get delivered at all. So saying that, hey, our conversion is, 25%, when in reality you're counting wishing to have converted in that KPI is not really good. So what we want to do is we want to have, I showed you our master dashboard earlier, but we want to have the same number ideally there and in Mixpanel, or very close to it, accounting for people that don't want to be tracked and stuff like that. So in order to do that, we need to have the same way to look at conversion in both places, which requires us to send all the state information there. So for example, for us, an order is an order that gets delivered, while we might want to see how people interact with the app in case they have defects. So we need to set it, okay, this was a defective order, and we can't really do these sort of from the app, and it was a choice not to implement this event sourcing in the backend, because we would have we already have that data that comes from transactional events, and we can mix in these two, and have a sort of make them usable for many different use cases, from experimentation to other things. So it's a design choice. Keeps a system simple, and bugs are generated in fewer places than not.
If you have any follow-up questions on this, I suggest we keep QA.
Yeah. Okay, I blew the schedule probably already.
No, that's great.
I knew it.
I love that we're getting questions, but I can hear that we are already passionate and very excited about the subject.
Right.
So I suggest we move those discussions to the Q&A.
I'll speed up. Right now we are in a transition phase because we really care about this workflow. We are trying to get all our YAML specification into Evo, and we have over 800 events in the consumer app, so it's a lot. So we need to merge what the apps are sending, because of course it's implemented in any way you can possibly imagine, since there is no sort of we didn't have an SDK for that. So that's work that's undergoing. But there are three things on the event tracking space that we really need to think carefully right now. For example, good ergonomics for developers. Developers tend not to want to use time to do this if it's very clunky. So here are a few examples of how we are integrating this whole thing in our developer toolkit on consumer web. And we have, for instance, a tracking plan converter that allows us to pull the tracking plan in JSON and convert it into TypeScript, and that then gets sort of merged with our internal tracking SDK. And we pull this from the main branch. We do runtime event completion and type checking there. For example, you can see properties is wrong here, and the developer can quickly go there and see why it's wrong. Okay, I'm missing an attribute, so I'm just going to code it. But this opens up things like, for instance, doing testing and automated testing for events to match, to check, to validate that every event is sent completely before we ship, for example, the web release to production. We also have a lot of helpers for tracking because we do a lot of advanced things. For example, we capture durations and a bunch of things in the app directly. So we kind of integrate all these things together so that developers doesn't have to worry about them. They just can code the event in, make sure that all the props are checked. And then we do also testing. So all these SDKs are integrated into our testing framework, and there we can, build a view, unmount it, and then see if everything is logged correctly. So we are really paying attention to these sort of ergonomics, and now we are going to roll out or build the same features in our iOS and Android stack. And this stuff is available to anybody who is building anything in the browser at Wolt. So it's portable to anyone else using TypeScript and our browser telemetry. And of course, great guidelines. Guidelines are, you can see the size of our guidelines there. But guidelines are nothing because no one wants to read the guidelines. So developers really want the tools, but the guidelines are another angle. We train people, we coach people, we try to cater to different persona. So we have developer guidelines and we have guidelines for analysts. The same thing written from two different angles, but you need it at scale. And then we try to offer incentives. For example, what's the incentive of having good tracking? Well, for example, you don't ruin an A/B test. We were just discussing, I think, 1 hour ago about this, so I just added this slide last minute. So we built our own internal tool for A/B testing. It's really, we run probably in the past 2 years, few hundred A/B tests. But the fallacy is that we use a lot of our application data now to run tests. And our application data, well, it's not great. So, we find out after 2 months that, okay, well, this event was broken somewhere. Hence, all our, information we gathered for 2 months is not valid. It's not great. So how about we would put here under metrics what events would go into this test, and we would be able to validate on the fly if those events are actually making sense or not. Maybe checking are they sent correctly from the latest version of the inspector SDK. So sort of we are trying to look at these things from sort of developer experience, the guidelines, but also the incentives to the product teams, to other personas in the product development to sort of converge and try to increase the willingness to collaborate to a great in-app analytics environment. All right, a lot of talking. A couple of things. The last few slides before foosball. If I learned something from these few years is that the most important thing when you scale a company is a bit controversial. Instead of trying to work in smaller and smaller teams as you grow, try to work on very large and complex projects. Those are the really hard ones. And I'm personally really interested in hearing stories about working together on large and complex projects and how those things scale as the companies grow. if you are in an early stage company, spend a lot of time to soak in as much as possible of what other teams around you are doing. Even if they are not directly related to you, this was one of the best things that happened to me in the early stages of Wolt. And then codify your decisions, but more importantly, the decision-making process, because all these things that we have done in the past 6 years, 7 years can be taught, but the process that we have used to come up to those decisions is more interesting for new joiners, and that's what people actually really want to learn. And then finally, enjoy the time you spend with your team. Getting data right is a journey, and dilemmas will definitely not leave you. There will be only new and exciting problems. Maybe next year we'll talk about how we leverage data and machine learning. Who knows? And that will be a more interesting talk, probably. Thank you very much.
There was actually a question from one of the panelists to one of the other panelists. So I'll allow you to run that question.
Yes.
Gunnar?
So your slide with the flow of data, you said event bank. Is that Avo?
No, actually, that's a question that has been asked already once today. That what we used to talk to refer to with event bank was mostly our repository. So I think that's what
The YAML one.
The YAML repository. That's just an event bank. So it's a place where you put events. Hey there,
The
but
new
don't collect
event
any
bank is
interest.
Avo.
Yeah, so it's and Evo I think is something more than that. It has a lot of interesting features that we are leveraging and we will be leveraging in the product development that are more than just a repository of events. So, yeah.
Nice, thank you. Good, yeah.
I'm wondering, like, if we don't have a data engineer on board, how do we stop us from getting into the same trap? Like, is there a great blog? Should we hire a consultant? Like, how do we know which questions to ask the data?
If I can say at least, I don't think you need a data engineer for that. But it's a, Silla, do you wanna?
Yeah, I can
No, you need an analyst.
take it.
Yeah, you need an analyst or just like a cool, smart person that thinks about exciting things to work with you.
Yeah, like I said, we're a 3-person team. 100% of us are here today. But yeah, I think the key for us at least was to just reach out. We reached out to Þóra and Smitten and Thorstein, people that have been in our shoes, before, and that way we were able to get to the point of asking ourselves the right questions. I think that's especially in such a small ecosystem as ours, people are so like one phone call away. So I think we should all try to just take advantage of that.
I can.
She's my cousin.
Hello, Iceland.
Maybe just to add, I love to think about this data journey as like a sliding scale. So at the very beginning of that journey, you have very few users, and usually like the best data person on the team is like a psychiatrist or a great listener or something. Just talking to users without any dashboards or data is usually like how you'd want to begin. At some point you have like more users than you know, and then you want to be able to like look them up to figure out like who to talk to. But at some point, like that slide there goes up to like you start relying more and more and more on data, and like the conversations that should continue to happen, like are like influenced and guided by the data. But like you started just like 100% like no data and just like conversations with users, and then it goes into like 50-50 and then maybe 75. Like I guess if you have like 10 users doing an A/B test that has like statistically significant numbers, would take like 8,000 weeks to complete. So like at some point, like just being a great listener is like the analyst on the team.
Yeah, plus one on this, great one.
Yeah, and I have to add one more thing. I started to view data engineering not as a role, but more like a skill that different roles actually should perhaps acquire. Or I think if we view it in that way, then it becomes a bit easier for you to understand, or like not to understand, but to think like how does my persona impact the quality of the data, or anything, experimentation, machine learning, or whatever you're doing in your company, in your role. So probably there is an angle that's more data engineering. It's already in your role, because it sort of starts from the very beginning. When you're planning a feature, data engineering starts there. And it's a responsibility of the product manager that maybe draws that feature with a designer. And instead of, oh, I need a data engineer or an analyst there in that meeting. No, you don't need that. You need sort of to think as a data engineer or as an analyst. I think that's a transformation we are also undergoing right now.
I literally have a talk, I gave a talk at the Coalesce conference 2021 maybe, that's called Don't Hire a Data Engineer. Because of exactly this. Like, I think a lot of people think that the first thing...
Oh, you are mic'd.
I'm mic'd, yeah, baby. I got my special mic right here. A lot of people think that the first step that they have to take to become data-driven is actually hire a data engineer. But I think the first step is finding the right questions to ask. You did ask, is there a blog? If you Google AVO purpose meeting, there is one starting point there, which is sort of like how we like to guide people through starting to ask the right questions, and then from there design the right metrics, and from there design the right data or events. And then there are a bunch of resources like that on our blog as well. Maybe we can add like a link somewhere.
Right here.
Yeah.
What happens if you Google purpose meeting without AVO?
We get a lot of like, what is the purpose of this meeting? Probably the picture of the guy that said like, this meeting should have been an email. Or something like that, yeah, exactly.
So Stephanie, your answer is basically don't hire a data engineer, hire me.
Exactly. Thank you, Will. Did you want to add to?
Yeah, you kind of beat me to the punch, but when starting, if you're starting from scratch especially, there's a tendency to want to just throw events everywhere and like, maybe we can use this one day. And I highly advise against doing that.
Plus one.
Start with the questions, the highest level question, and then keep breaking that question down into smaller and smaller questions until you get to a point where it's just an action and it's almost binary. And that is where an event goes. And then you just work your way back up the chain. And that way you prevent yourself from having this mess of user pushed this specific button on this page event. Like, it just is a nightmare.
Both it's a nightmare in the data set, and it's also a nightmare to ask developers to implement those kinds of events, because all of a sudden you have a very large list of events that you're asking someone to implement, but you don't really have a reason for why. And then you don't have you don't end up with the prioritized list of the most important data set for your product. So, plus one on that. Great question. Other questions? Yeah, Hilmar.
Your talk got me thinking a bit about kind of optimism bias, and like when the graph went down, you had like all hands on deck on analyzing that, but like when it went up, you just kind of, well, I guess you kind of had a reason, but like I would just always think like, yeah, we're awesome, like why wouldn't it go up? So my question is like, should you kind of analyze when it goes up for no reason as well, in the same way?
In theory, of course, but one thing I forgot to mention during the talk is like concurrently with the weekly active user growth, we also saw almost the same scale of revenue growth and activity growth. And so everything kind of aligned upwards. We didn't really understand we didn't have an estimate of how large of a growth jump to expect. And so we saw this massive growth. We're like, this is the best. Let's start calling investors Series B. Let's go. And then, yeah.
Why didn't you just add kind of matched happen back into the...
I mean, it's like, that's also hurting us too. Like identifying the problem and then fixing it. I mean, it's obviously painful when you do the fix and you realize that you went from champagne to just pain. That's the worst, but especially to like the marketing team. We're here, but I think a couple of them left because of the PTSD from that. But getting it fixed and then like reestablishing like, okay, we've fixed this issue. here are plans in place to prevent it from happening again. It's probably going to happen again still, but we know how to deal with it next time.
But it's a great question. Does anyone have any other thoughts on the optimism bias?
I'm not so sure if I can talk
And maybe
about
can
it.
you come closer to me? I'm not sure you're seen in the camera.
This is close enough.
I don't know.
I think it's something that so you tend to talk about failures more than sort of trying to. So what I'm seeing, especially in our journey, is that we tend to overanalyze when things go wrong, and then not analyze really well when things changed for the best, and then you kind of build this sort of, you assume that things move for the better, but then you sort of don't try to understand what did I learn from this change in trend or whatever. And for us it is quite difficult at our scale to communicate these things, but we actually did a lot of that when we were much smaller. For instance, our business is very seasonal, but as we grew, the seasonality of different countries is much different. So sort of we really had to go there and analyze how things work in Sweden, how things work in Estonia, how things work in Japan. No one seems to behave in the same way, which is sort of problematic. But then, so you don't have a playbook for that. And when part of your playbook is try to understand also when things move for the positive and what are the drivers, then you spot these sort of problems. And it helps if you have people that are very active. They are looking at the numbers every day. Like for instance, in our CEO office is quite active in those things, and they look at these dashboards daily, and they are going to call them out. Like a day to day, there is this very big green. What is that? And it might be at a city level. Like this city turned this number up in an unexpected way. So what's going on there? Oh, sorry, it's a data problem. Yeah.
I would say about this definitely that with some experience in using data, positive spikes also cause great suspicions. Like when charts at Avo spike, I'll be like, what's and my first question will be like, is there something that caused it other than just great success? And I think that is experience. It comes with experience. But I think you're right that when things go down, and it's good. Like when things go down, you think, okay, we need to react to something really quickly and fix it. So I think it's more urgent maybe when that happens. But yeah.
Makes sense.
Questions? Other questions? Yeah, Christian.
Yeah, I want for Jacopo. I love the way that you use Snowflake to enhance the events before they go to Mixpanel. Yeah, so I guess I'm curious what tool do you use? Do you use like a transformation layer like DBT, and also do you miss the ability to see real time?
Can you repeat the question before you answer it?
I was already thinking about the answer, but so what tools do we use to do this stuff? Do we use DBT? To do transformations before we send data to Mixpanel? And you had and do we miss real time? So this is an interesting one. We made a and it might be controversial, so it might be cut from that. So sorry for the people who are watching this later, but we made a deliberate choice to not look at DBT because we think it's dangerous. It's controversial. Sorry, we can talk about it later. But I think the danger lies in not being able to do analytics or data work in real time at all, because you end up building layers and layers of transformations in SQL that you are not going to be able to eliminate when you need to go real time. So we sort of are trying to keep everything reasonably clean. Just as a context, we have sort of 350 data sets from our services, coming from services, and around 650 derived tables. So it's quite a vast data space. But the transformations are sort of usually sort of cascading. So you have sort of clean transformations directly from source tables. And we are building our own tooling for doing these data workflows that take into account dependency management and all sorts of things like these. And the idea is that then we are going to move these into streaming. And right now we're moving to an architecture where we can work with the same data that we stream and that we look at or insert in Snowflake for asynchronous utilization. And I'm not so sure if we are ready to talk about it publicly, but I would love to engage in a conversation a bit later if you are around. Yeah, but basically it's a deliberate design choice. Do we miss real time? We had a lot of interesting use cases for real time, but right now what we want to do is we want to have one solution to do batch and streaming on top of the same data, feature stores, and other things for everyone that wants to do data at Wolt right now. So that's the goal, and that's what we're working on right now. Yeah.
One thing to add about the real-time conversation. I was once chatting with Suhail, the founder of Mixpanel, and in the beginning of the Mixpanel journey, they put a lot of effort into providing real-time data for everyone, so everyone could get how many people are in the cart right now. What they learned pretty quickly, they poured money, cash, into architecture that would support that. What they learned is that people don't necessarily need real time. It's okay for the data to be lagging a little bit, but the interactiveness of the product needs to be really quick. And so people forgive you for having not completely up-to-date data if your experiencing with actually looking at the data that you are trying to look at is pretty solid. And so I think that's a learning that we can also apply if we're building internal dashboards, like try to make the internal dashboards use cache if you can, so that when someone is trying to look at a specific thing, then they get that information quickly, but they have a disclaimer saying like, this is 1 hour old, or this is 1 day old, or something like that.
Yeah, I think you raise quite a good.
I think you're mic'd. Yeah, that's okay. Gunnar can hold this.
I think you raise a good point. It's actually a differentiating factor. If you can slice and dice your data very fast, that's where you're usually not looking at real-time data. You don't care about looking at what are kind of personas are in my cart. But
last second.
Last second. That's completely inactionable. But you really want to look at trends and analyze large amounts of data in sort of real time when you are there touching the data. I think that's more relevant.
Yeah.
I also think that the only kind of true real-time data that you can hope to get is from the server. I think there's no way to kind of accurately get real-time data from clients. Even with like streaming inserts and like intraday tables, you will always have like a lack of like even like multiple days. Like when people turn off their phone or like leave Wi-Fi, close the app, then like most of the SDKs kind of like just store the events and then send them up when you open up the app again. So like your real-time data from the client will never ever be kind of the same. But like server events is different, but like all the real-time numbers from the client will always gonna be like maybe 90% accurate in real time. And then like over the course of like people opening up the app again, it might.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is a really good point. Like this is experience talking right here. Other questions?
Lots of frustration.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't fucking matter.
But it also depends. For instance, we control our event SDK, for example, because we wrote it. So we can control when we write.
Mm-hmm. But you can't control when the app sends the event to your server.
If we write the SDK, we can control the error. So at least you can control, for instance, that you flush the events we try to flush as hard as possible. But if you use some third-party SDK, you never know how it's going to, and they are not going to change the SDK for you.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what I learned.
Yes, they do.
Another question from the audience? Great, everyone's just,
I can just like add on to this. Like I worked at Spotify, but I recently joined QuestPortal actually. But at Spotify, kind of things are not real time by default there as well. And kind of like the main thinking there is that like we're just not able to act on data in real time. Mm-hmm. So it's just a huge cost that kind of gives you really nothing.
Mm-hmm. Hilmar was sharing that also at Spotify they make the same decision that acting real time on data isn't necessarily valuable for sharing. So I will give sort of just like the floor over to beers, I think. People mingling, and thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Jacopo, for flying out here. It's really a pleasure. Thank you, everyone.